The memories of a man in his old age are the deeds of a man in his prime. So begins Roger Waters' Dark Side of the Moon Redux. Now, when this album was first announced, I was very skeptical. Why do we need to redo one of the most classic of classic albums that was ever recorded? How can you possibly improve on the original recordings? In fairness, Roger Waters did come out and say he loved the original album. He loved the work from Rick Wright, from Nick Mason and from David Gilmour. He loved that album, and this wasn't an attempt to redo it or rehash it, or certainly not to improve it. Instead, taking a theme from his lockdown sessions where an older man was looking back at his younger self, Roger was contemplating, well, what have we learnt from Dark Side of the Moon? How does that work in today's society or perspective? And how does it work from a young, optimistic 29-year-old recording Dark Side to a wizened and cynical old 75-year-old man? And so we have an album that sounds like Dark Side of the Moon, but is fundamentally different. The melodies of the songs are still there. Some of the sound effects are still there. None of the old vox pops, the old conversations, I've always been mad, I know I've been mad, all of that are gone. Instead, we've got Roger talking mostly over the backing tracks, if you like. He talks about memories of an old man, looking back at him in the earlier years. He talks about dreams he's had. He picks up on some of the things that you might have heard him talk about in interviews, issues with global wars and all sorts of stuff that we won't get into today. And what he builds is actually a beautiful album that uses the original Dark Side as the canvas. The big question, I think for many people, myself especially or included, was what are we going to do with Great Gig in the Sky? It continues to be a live staple for certainly David Gilmour's tours and the 80s and 90s Pink Floyd tours, but I've never felt you can get anywhere close to those original vocals, and he doesn't even try. In fact, we have a very clever use of a synthesizer, not quite sure what it is, that effectively plays the song's melody over the top. While Roger talks about Donald Hall, and it actually proves to be a very engaging song as part of the wider album. There are cynical notes back to previous self. He starts to talk about money. How much have you got? How much am I going to give you? None. And he also talks about brain damage. His last tour, This Is Not a Drill, was very much focused on the challenges of his old friend Syd Barrett and his issues with mental capacity. And certainly in brain damage, there is a joke. Roger starts with a joke. Why don't we re-record Dark Side of the Moon? But it works. And I think this is a great album. It is not replacing Dark Side of the Moon. It is not an homage. It is not a parody. It's not a complete re-jazz like Dub Side of the Moon, which is worth a listen. This is Roger using his own material as a canvas and bringing it up to date. I recommend it. I think it's a fantastic album. It's definitely worth a listen. It's one that keeps coming back to me, and it sits alongside Dark Side of the Moon. The album cover itself, we're going with animals again here. We've got this big dog. There's a tiny reference here to the original album cover, the Prism. And it's a great album. Go and have a listen. I think it's worth your time.